The Manhattan Project. Nearing the end of the Second World War, the US dropped 2 nuclear bombs on Japan, the power of which has never been seen nor even imagined before. From then on, whether you realized it or not, at that time, our world changed and we were officially ushered into the nuclear age, which only begs the question, how did it start? And what was the story behind it? In this video, we'll talk about the Manhattan Project and how it came to be. Many people know of the Manhattan Project regarding the Second World War, and rightfully so. Still, its story actually began before the war even started. In Germany in 1938, 2 scientists, Otto Hahn and Fritz Strassmann, discovered nuclear fission. Nuclear fission is splitting an atom into 2 or more smaller particles. For the longest time, an atom was believed to be the smallest component of all matter. In fact, the word atom is derived from the word atomos, which means uncuttable or indivisible. That having said, when other scientists disproved this as they discovered protons, electrons, and neutrons, which turned out to be the atom's components, the question then became, what if we split the atom? Eventually, these 2 scientists figured out that the way to split the atom was to bombard it with neutrons. They were successful in doing it to a uranium-235, but just as important as this discovery, the 2 scientists also discovered that nuclear fission releases a large amount of energy in the form of heat and radiation. And for the scientists at that time, in Germany, under the rule of one of the most ruthless dictators the world has ever seen, only one thing mattered. Could this new discovery be weaponized? And the answer is a resounding yes. But not just any weapon. The recent discovery had the potential to create a super weapon the world had never seen before. A few months after the discovery, Albert Einstein and his colleague Leo Szilard sent a letter to US President Franklin D. Roosevelt warning him about the discovery and Germany's possible plan to build an atomic bomb. Einstein needed to be convinced by a few scientists to sign his name to the letter so it would carry more weight. In response to the letter, FDR formed the Uranium Committee, consisting of military and scientific experts, to study the matter and, hopefully, figure it out before the Germans did. The team's progress was slow at the start, partly because it was funded but not prioritized. That didn't last long though. In 1941, the Japanese military launched a surprise attack on the United States Naval Base at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. The attack killed 2,403 US personnel and 68 civilians. It also damaged 19 US Navy ships, including 8 battleships. This forced the US to officially join the war with Great Britain, France, and Russia against the Germans in Europe and the Japanese in the Pacific. By 1942, the US started to feel the pressure of the impending development of an atomic bomb, which Germany may be years ahead of. Thus, they went all in on the research and development of their own. On August 13, 1942, the Manhattan Project was officially created. But first, where did the name come from? Well, even though the operations of the project were scattered across different parts of the country and the globe, the first office used for the project was in fact in Manhattan. Specifically, at 270 Broadway, Brigadier General Leslie R. Groves was chosen to head the project. He was the clear choice as he was a master of overseeing successful projects. Before he was appointed, he single-handedly oversaw all army construction in the United States for the war. That included building camps, munitions, airfields, and even the Pentagon. His first task was to select the lead scientist to see the project through, and he already had one in mind: J. Robert Oppenheimer. Oppenheimer was an American theoretical physicist. He was born in New York City to Jewish immigrants from Germany. He was a genius, and it showed from a very young age. At age 10, he already studied minerals, physics, and chemistry. He started corresponding with the New York Mineralogical Club. He was so advanced on the matter that they invited him to give a lecture, not realizing that at that time, Robert was only 12 years old. He studied in Harvard and excelled in a wide variety of subjects. Eventually, Oppenheimer focused on physics and began his graduate work at Cambridge in 1925. Before General Groves contacted him, he was already exploring the possibility of an atomic bomb. He was doing research on fast neutrons and how much material would be needed, and how efficient it might be for a bomb. Thus, the choice was an easy one. As I said before, different sites aided in the Manhattan Project. There was a base in Oak Ridge, Tennessee, where the uranium enrichment plants were located. There was a site in Washington where a full-scale plutonium production plant was operational. Scientists from schools like Harvard and MIT contributed to the project. The project also received contributions from different places like Utah, Cuba, and Canada. That having said, the location project's primary weapons research laboratory was chosen by Oppenheimer, and he decided on Los Alamos, New Mexico. Most of the research and the construction of the bomb happened in Los Alamos. In no time, it became a little town full of scientists, engineers, and of course, the military. For it to be weaponized, the process of splitting the atom must be done in quick succession, multiple times. Once an atom is split, the subatomic particles inside it are also released, including neutrons. So suppose a similar atom gets bombarded with another set of these neutrons. In that case, it splits again, and the process repeats itself. This creates a chain reaction that enables the massive explosion the group is targeting. That having said, it still needs to be a stable chain reaction for the bomb to work. That is where Enrico Fermi comes into the picture. He was an Italian physicist who was also a part of the Manhattan Project. He figured out the right method for the nuke to achieve a stable chain reaction. The detonator would act like a gun, and with enough explosives, the uranium-235 will destabilize and produce the proper chain reaction. They still had a problem though. They had another nuke that needed to work better with Fermi's design, and they couldn't make it work like the first. Eventually, they figured out a different process. Instead of making it explode, they made the second nuke implode. Instead of expanding, it collapses upon itself and squeezes everything in. It still produces a large amount of energy, just like an explosion. By 1944, the scientists started to feel the pressure. The Manhattan Project has been always considered as Allies' entry into the race. Their main goal was not only to develop nuclear weapons, but also to develop them before the Germans. It was apparent for the scientists who were refugees from Germany. They know what kind of a villain Hitler was and how capable his subordinates were. Little did they know, despite discovering nuclear fission first, the Germans were leaps and bounds behind the Allies. And part of the reason is that many of their most brilliant scientists defected to the other side, most of which are Jewish. On July 16, 1945, the team broke ground as they detonated the first atomic bomb. They did this at the Trinity site in the New Mexico desert. This is where the name of the test came from, as it was called the Trinity Test. They used a plutonium bomb they named Gadget. It exploded with approximately 20 kilotons of force. It produced a mushroom cloud that rose to 8 miles high and left a 10 feet deep crater 1,000 feet wide. And with that, we were ushered into the nuclear age. But before the US used its superweapon against its enemies, a conference was held in Potsdam in Germany. By then, Germany had already surrendered and given up on the war, but Japan was hard-headed and determined still. Even though days and months passed, it was getting more challenging for them. On July 26, the US delivered an ultimatum to Japan to surrender under the terms provided for in the Potsdam Declaration, which included reform in the Japanese government into a more peaceful and democratic one, among other provisions. The US warned Japan that prompt and utter destruction would follow if they didn't accept it. True to form, the Japanese refused to surrender still. On August 6, 1945, an American B-29 bomber named Enola Gay flew over Hiroshima, Japan, carrying the uranium-235 gun-type bomb that the group called Little Boy. The Little Boy was dropped by a parachute and detonated 600 feet above the ground at precisely 8:16 in the morning. It exploded with about 13 kilotons of force and created a mushroom cloud of 10,000 feet. According to the estimate, 80 to 140,000 people were immediately killed by the explosion, with 100,000 more seriously injured. 3 days later, a second atomic bomb was dropped in Nagasaki. It was carried by another B-29 bomber called Boxcar. This time it was a plutonium explosion-type bomb known as Fat Man. It exploded at 11:02 a.m. over the narrow Urakami Valley, northwest of downtown Nagasaki. It is estimated that between 40,000 and 75,000 immediately died following the explosion, while 60,000 people suffered injuries. All in all, the two bombings resulted in more or less 200,000 casualties. Japan signed their surrender on September 2, 1945. In the end, the Manhattan Project left a highly complex legacy. On one hand, they succeeded in developing the nuclear bomb before the Germans, but the project also sparked an arms race during the Cold War. It influenced other countries like the Soviet Union and France to start their own nuclear programs. It also led to peaceful nuclear innovations, including nuclear power. Lastly, the brunt of the controversy stems from the necessity of dropping the two nukes in Japan when the Japanese were already losing, especially since it had so many civilian casualties. Many wonder whether or not it was worth developing the weapon that could erase humanity in the first place. If you don't believe me, then hear it from the project's lead scientist himself. This was J. Robert Oppenheimer quoting a piece of Hindu scripture. "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds."